Let me share my slides. Okay. Share. Okay, let me quickly introduce myself, introduce the group. So welcome to Agile Practitioner Special Interest Group. This is one of the first virtual user groups. We've been in Zoom starting 2017. To a certain extent, this phenomena of virtual user group was even presented to the Scrum Alliance Global Scrum Gathering. That time it was unique because we are the organizers, a couple of people we were behind that. In San Francisco, we were tired of driving through the traffic to the face-to-face meetings, paying $30 to park a car. I said, okay, let's go online so that you could enjoy a conversation in the comfort of our personal office or home. And plus, we could extend the geography of this group. So we started in 2007, and it's already 1,500 people who are following us, not 1,300. We are still growing. Last year was a really good year. We had great speakers. This user group is affiliated with the Scrum Alliance. That means you could claim one Scrum education unit for being a part of this group. My name is Alexander Frumkin. People know me as Sasha, my nickname. I am Agile coach and trainer from San Francisco Bay Area, and I facilitate this group from day one. Usually, we already declare who is going to be our next speaker and what the topic is going to be. This time we are a little bit behind. So I'm already talking with Dana, who agreed to be our next speaker, but we did not lock on the topic yet. So please stay tuned. Dana is a good friend. She's one of the certified enterprise coaches, very few of them. She's in New York, working for Federal Reserve. She is affiliated with Agile Alliance. She's one of the organizers of the annual Agile Alliance event. So, and she is a great speaker. Her stronger side is facilitation. So she's probably going to show us something about facilitation, but we are not clear yet. And tonight, I'm really happy to invite Vishal and Dorian to speak at our group. Thank you, folks, for joining us. Once you have a control, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself. So we are talking about very unusual topic. That is Agile for software. And folks promised to show us some innovative framework that was developed by them specifically for the world of hardware. So I started at 5:40. It didn't take me long to do the presentation. So I am going to stop presenting. And with this said, folks, our guests, please, you have the flight controls. We are happy to have you here. All to you.
Great. Thank you, Sasha. Let me make sure the technology works here real quick. What do you see a spreadsheet?
Yep.
That's not good. Oh, that's good. You see that, but that's not what we're going to share with you all. Oh, there you
go. Before we start, one organizational question.
Yeah.
Would you like people to ask questions at the end, or they could interrupt you at any point?
I was just thinking about that. I love this size of group. I think any time is going to be good. We were sharing that, Vishal and I are both with you today, and we'll introduce ourselves, but we often like to do one of us is presenting, the other one's in chat, answering questions and having a discussion. But it's such a great small group. I think just ask a question when you have one, and we'll pause at certain points. We only have about 40 minutes of content, so I think we're going to be pretty good to do live Q&A. And then, of course, we'd like some time at the end as well to have an open discussion.
Okay, questions at any time
Yeah.
is going to be.
We will we'll probably cover a lot of your questions as we go through. So that's one of the challenges that we often will cover, because we're going to get to the MAHD framework more and talk through the framework, and then some questions will likely bubble up through it that we're going to answer later. So we might just say, hey, let's talk about that later. So just to give you a heads up.
So the only thing I will request is if anyone who has a question or a comment, if you could just do the raise hand thing on Zoom. That way it's, we can kind of, obviously we're alerted to hey, someone wants to talk.
Yeah. 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 We'll figure it out. It's a small group, which is great. Okay. You see the engineering the future? Are we good there? Okay. So I liked your comment about this is an unusual topic. For us, it's not, and I don't think it's going to be unusual in the future. I think, just chatting with you a couple before we started, that most companies who are hardware companies, physical development, they're going to get more and more pressure to think about what does Agile mean for us, and they're certainly getting pressure on how to go faster, how to be more efficient. So I don't think it's going to be unusual in the future, but I agree with you that we always try to estimate what's the market size for hardware versus software. And software is just massive from a number of companies, and the process of Agile that can be the overall market size is so much larger for software. So it gets all the attention. So we're really happy that you allowed us to join you tonight and share our experience with Agile for hardware. Real quick introduction. I'll let Vishal introduce himself. I'm Dorian. I'm the guy on the left, the one with less hair. I'm one of the founders of the MAHD framework and one of the lead consultants. And my background, I used to be an electrical engineer by origin, and had to get involved in software very early. You can't do electrical engineering without a lot of software involvement. So a lot of integration work in core software. And I used to do stage gate processes early on, and I went into consulting and actually helped companies develop stage gate. And when Agile came about and the principles, we just found them so valuable, and then immediately try and apply them to physical products way back early, and saw the struggles that teams had. And that's what led me down this path of, okay, how can we make Agile really work and get the benefits for physical development? And that's why I'm here today. Vishal, quick say hi.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for joining, taking the time today. Slightly different path to essentially, MAHD. But yeah, I was started my career more in the software side of the world. I'd done XP, like I mentioned earlier, a long time ago. I did move into Agile right around 2006, helped a few companies transition to Agile. At a certain point, I got an opportunity like where I was running the PMO, and it was a hardware software kind of a setup, and so spent a bunch of time figuring out how to make that work. And at some point came across Dorian, and I was like, hey, wow, this is kind of like we've the melting of the minds, I suppose, and found the right framework that makes sense. So we've been working together ever since. I also love scaling, change management, because a lot of Agile is about the mindset. And so how can organizations work through that hump of getting through the mindset challenges? There's a concept called organizational flow that I've also been thinking and writing about, but we'll get to that at some point when it's more mature. But thank you for joining.
Great. All right. So I can't continue really until I address your statement, Aaron, in chat. Go, Dr. Cooper, stage gate. Are you a huge advocate of stage gate, or is there a little bit of sarcasm in there? Where's that coming from?
Oh, I'm a huge fan of of Dr. Cooper. I took when I was at Honeywell in the 2000s. We contracted him, and I got certified. A bunch of us, I mean, zillion people did. But so yeah, no, I've been a huge fan of the global product leadership models, and but just basically we decided to all forget in the last 20 years of the $15 trillion tech bubble because we need lots of novelty and cool shiny things. And now we're gonna, with high interest rates, start to actually have to pay attention again because CapEx ain't free anymore. So but it's funny because you're reintroducing that. Very few people are, which is great to hear that you're doing that. So
Well, it's going to be interesting because in a lot of ways we have to untrain people a little bit on StageGate. So let's talk through that. We want to get your perspective on this. It's going to be interesting.
sure, that'd be great. Thanks.
I've got I got a rich history with Dr. Cooper as well. But reading his first book where there wasn't even a phase 0, which I always found just amazing. And just now the movement to Agile, I forget what he calls it, Agile. Stage Agile Gate? What's he called?
Yeah, something like that. We used to
Yeah.
call it phase -1 too, actually. That was what we used to play games with.
Yeah. So, he's embraced Agile as well and bringing in Agile really, in combination with phase gate. So, and that's something we talk about a lot when we work with customers on what does that really mean. So this is going to be an interesting conversation. I thought we could start with, if you can, open up your chat or just, actually, let's do this in chat because we want to kind of accelerate a little bit. Just to understand the folks with us tonight, what is your experience with Agile as applied to hardware development? Do you have any experience? Do you see your companies doing it today, or it's completely new to you? Just kind of give us a kind of a where we are from your standpoint with Agile for hardware, or maybe you don't have any Agile experience at all, and that's okay too. See if I can bring up the chat here. Yep. There we go. Good, Doug. You attempted it. Okay. Started Apply Summit. Only software. Very good. Google Sprints. Oh my God, just Agile-ish. Yes, a lot of Agile-ish going around. Okay, great. Yep. Yeah, wait without the benefits. Oh, that's a good one. Okay, great. Follow-up question, and you're kind of already answering this a little bit, is there a particular challenge you've seen trying to do it, or would you anticipate if you haven't tried to do it? And I think you've already answered a couple of you already answered that. What's the biggest challenge you're seeing? Yeah. Thank you, Doug. Getting people to understand it at the senior level, big challenge because Agile has a very established now. What does it mean? And if they can't see beyond that a little bit, it's a big struggle. Yeah. Predictability. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah. Right. FDA regulations. Yep. Yeah. Unexpected. Yeah. So one of the things we're going to challenge, Giovanni is a good example. Software is more predictable, unexpected completion date. From our experience, when we apply Agile appropriately for hardware, it's actually more predictable than StageGate. And we'll explain that a little bit and see if there's any questions about how that actually works. So let's dive in a little bit and we'll see if we come back to these. You're welcome to keep adding things to the chat. One of the things we want to make sure that we do is cover some specific use cases so that you can kind of see how it worked with different companies. We can't go too deep in the specifics of these projects, but we want to give you an idea of what their current situation was and how they applied Agile techniques to really improve their ability to deliver hardware better, faster, cheaper, and what that looked like with specific projects. So we'll come back to these. One of the early ones is a satellite communication encryption company that is very early in thinking about Agile, domestic robots, industrial process control. So these are some of the industries that we hear from all the time that are really thinking about Agile, but it's a wide range of industries that are really thinking about Agile for hardware. So our outline, and we're gonna have about 40 minutes of content, and hopefully much more in Q&A. We can go deeper wherever you want to go deeper. But it's really important, we think, to establish, well, what's the problem, particularly for hardware companies? What are we actually trying to solve? And Aaron's got a good point that a lot of people have kind of forgot and maybe think stage gate's the right answer, but they kind of don't even do the really intention of that, and so they've kind of gotten lazy and all kinds of things. But is that really the problem? So let's look at the problem a little bit, and then is Agile really the solution? And of course, what are the challenges of Agile for hardware? And then let's talk through what the MAHD framework is. So I'm going to kick us off first 20 slides or so, and then Vishal is going to walk us through what is the MAHD framework, and then we'll have hopefully really good time for discussion. So part of the work that we've done through the last multiple years is what are the real factors that enable success for new products, for projects in general. And we always want to take a step back. People get so focused on the tactics of the process and all the details of the process, we often lose track of what's the purpose of a process. And they often get so hung up on, Six Sigma and all the black belts and getting certifications that we kind of lose track. And so one of the first things that we like to do with any company is understand what are you trying to accomplish, and then talk through and see how teams are doing with the factors that are leading to those. And almost in every situation, companies are trying to go faster. Lots of reasons for that. They're trying to increase efficiency, of course, doing more with less. And everybody's still focused, and they should be, on greater customer value, and of course, ultimately improved ROI. And so from a lot of the work that we've done, there's really 6 key factors that enable those ultimate results of speed, efficiency, and value. And we won't go through these in too detail, but what we want to do is look at how the different processes approach these a little bit, just to give you a quick idea of how they compare and where the gaps are. And just kind of walk through these 6 real quick. Is project governance. How do you make great decisions? And this is something very different between hardware and software, the types of decisions that have to get made. And it's at both the project level, kind of the portfolio level, as well as down at the feature level. What kind of trade-offs do we have to make? Part of that's cost and allocation of resources. A big one is number 2 here, collaboration. How well are teams working together, team members working together to solve problems, to share knowledge, and how seamless is that? Third one is an innovation factors. Are they being creative? Are they really see customer needs and are able to apply creative solutions to do that and create differentiation that leads to new opportunities, better products? Fourth one, leveraging insight. How do they get data? How do they leverage data? And of course, a huge one is risk management. So how fast can the team identify and resolve unknowns and make that start risk mitigation from day one and do it in the right direction with the right focus? Are they removing risk that's going to really add value, or are they just removing risk just for the purpose of removing risk? And those are 2 different things. And last one is just transparency. Is everybody on the same page? Are you solving problems openly? Is the schedule, transparent? Is everybody visible? And are you really solving problems rather than kind of shoving them under the table? You're putting the moose on the table, we often said in my Motorola's days. And so we're going to look at how these different processes kind of optimize each of these enabling factors a little bit. So that's a little bit of our kind of metrics pool. The first one we'll look at is stage gate. And we won't spend too much time on each of these because we want to get to MAHD. But this is really the starting point for most of the companies we work with, is they have some form of phased development system, often stage gate, Dr. Cooper's work, or whatever the consultant they brought in 1992. And it's something that I did early on, was help companies implement stage gate. And it's just, at the end of the day, it's common sense in a lot of ways, that it just seems natural that once you have an idea or you've discovered a new project or an opportunity, that you would evaluate it, develop the business case, then you define it, then you plan it, then you develop a test, deploy, and it just seems natural. And I think that's one of the reasons that 80% of companies use it, because it's just so logical. It gives management a view of how things are chugging along, and it should just work. But from our experience, and from my experience from very early on, both as an engineering manager, I went then into product management. I used to be on both sides of this table, even up through executive management. And there was always problems. And teams always either worked around the process or they created problems. And so let's take a look a little bit at how it would look against those enabling factors. So it works really well generally if there's no risk. And so NPD, a waterfall or stage gate process will always deliver a product. And I think that's what, and companies don't want to give up. And they feel very comfortable with it. I've got the schedule, I've got deliverables. I know what the team's doing. And so they feel very comfortable with it because it will deliver a product. But if there's really any risk involved, or the teams really want to be innovative, do something new, or there's a lot of unknowns in the project, stage gate and waterfall systems just really don't work very well. So teams really do need a new approach. They're bad at really driving efficiency in a way of working, and that's what we want to build a little bit. So at the end of the day, stage gate was really intended mostly as a governance process. The kind of the core of it is at the end of each stage, there's a gate. And the gate is a governance gate. It's, did you complete this, this, and this? And it's really, teams often are focused more on the gate than on solving the market problem. And so they're kind of going gate to gate, but it really drives a lot of weird behavior sometimes. And a lot of it is that making a lot of these assumptions up front, because they have to get these gate requirements of finished requirements that are often signed off. I got to sign off on this requirement and says, this is it. This is the solution we're going to build. And then that passes down the planning and develop a schedule, and that gets signed off. And so you're just building on these assumptions. We got assumptions building on assumptions. And that becomes the contract. And as soon as people veer from that contract, things kind of fall apart. You create more friction, and all kinds of things happen in there. So it assumes accurate data. The front end we'll look at can take months or years because of that high level of confidence the teams are looking for even to get started, that management's looking for even to get started. It allows very little room for limited experimentation after that, very limited real collaboration after that. And then ultimately, the biggest challenge is that real learning often comes very late in the project. You do put something in front of customers, it's often very late once you feel like you've got a nearly functional prototype or an early version, and then all of a sudden you start learning, and then it's just too late to make any changes because everything's kind of baked in. So it's really good for a schedule framework, but there's really not a lot in there that's going to be an optimal way of working for teams to be efficient, to be more innovative, to focus on customer value. So can you make stage gate in waterfall work? Absolutely. A lot of companies have figured it out that's we don't use gates just to checklists and governance that we do a lot of this, but it's not built in typically. They've got to figure out how to do it, and it's often their most
We have a Zoom bomber that I'm going to remove.
Yeah.
Man.
Was it something I said? He's really upset. Wow. All right. So if you think about waterfall a little bit, in waterfall and stage gate are not necessarily.
Oh my God! Y'all are racist! Y'all are racist! It's because I'm black!
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But if you look about the profile of the enabling capabilities for stage gate or waterfall across project governance, that's probably the highest. And this is actually, just to read the spider chart a little bit, at the number of 1, 2, 3, 4, that's the highest. That's like on a scale of 1 to 10, that's 10. Companies are doing really well with this. And at the center is 0. And these where we place these, this is based on data from multiple companies we've worked with, and we ask companies how do they feel about their current gate in terms of leveraging these how well their process enables these. And this is pretty typical. Even on governance, barely beats a 5 on scale 1. Collaboration, low on innovation. Leveraging insight, not very low. Probably risk management is what it does, because that's a lot of people focus on that. And then transparency. So it's kind of low across the board. And I think the most interesting we often find is that the pure intent, the purpose of StageGate is project governance, especially at the project level. And it should be really high on that factor, but even on that factor, it's pretty low. So in general, it just doesn't do a lot for teams. And we're a little biased, or the data is a little biased, because these are companies that we're talking with or working with that see the problem and they're looking for a better way. If we worked with companies that were, thinking StageGate is great and all this is working for them, it'd probably be a little higher, just for full disclosure. So that's the problem we see all the time, all these assumptions, and then we'll look at how Agile kind of more practically work through some of that challenges. But so the question is Agile the solution? And we know that from other data, 90% plus of software organizations have already embraced Agile. They're using some form of Agile. And it's also very common sense. I develop a prioritized backlog. I do things in cycles. I learn, I release, I repeat it. I do that in very short cycles. And so why wouldn't that work great for hardware? Because it's almost common sense as well. And if you've ever trained some teams on pure Agile for software or Scrum in a software environment, it's fairly straightforward to train. They can learn it very quickly, they get it, and they see value and benefits pretty quickly. So it makes sense that it would be adopted so quickly. And one of the reasons is that software absolutely needed a better way. StageGate and Waterfall really never made much sense for software, even though you could argue that's really where it came out or started, was in software. Because generally the comment we often hear is that it takes longer to write requirements and document everything than it does just to write the code and test it and try it. And there's a lot of truth to that. So it really made very little sense for software. So, you're all familiar with the Agile Manifesto. Everybody got in a room. Let's not focus on requirements. Let's focus on capturing customer needs first through user stories. Let's prioritize those. We're not going to write a lot of detailed specs. We're going to wireframe, we're going to code, we're going to test, we're going to release, and we're going to do it again. And so the tactics are completely aligned with that. And one of the nice things about Agile for software is that once a team learns the tactics of Agile, they actually can build a pretty good mindset around Agile. The tactics and the mindset are very, very closely linked. And so you'll see that, once teams kind of embrace user stories and capturing customer needs through user stories, prioritizing those, working together as a team, that they can be Agile by working through the tactics of Agile. And one of the things that we're going to see in hardware is that's a little more challenging, that the teams really need to embrace the mindset of Agile first, and then think about more deeply how the tactics can be applied to that. And one of the things that we're going to modify are the tactics to make the mindset work for hardware teams. And that's a big part of what we'll talk through today. So, back to these 6 enabling capabilities, if I was just going to look at software, for software projects, Agile does a really good job on all of these. It's pretty strong, very strong on feature decisions, and one of the big gaps is on the project decisions. It's because it doesn't really need to, and we'll talk through a little bit why that is. Collaboration, it goes really far in collaboration. It's one of the cores of it. It doesn't really need to worry too much about innovation, because innovation is kind of feature by feature. We're not really worried about a ton of innovation once we have a platform, but we're worried about innovation kind of on a feature by feature level, not radical innovations. One of the complaints of Agile is that it feels very incremental. We're going to add a little bit over time. Where's the breakthroughs? And that's one of the complaints of Agile generally, is that it's kind of an incremental development process, and you're not getting as much innovation as some companies want. Leveraging insights, kind of case by case, but that's built into the model that you get customer insight if you leverage that well and you do it well. And risk management, very similar, and high transparency. So Agile for software hits benefits across all of these, and that's why you see so many benefits that companies see. Hardware is different. So this is the hardware, Agile for Hardware challenge. And I think it's just important to note, if you have worked both in hardware and software, you know that they're fundamentally different. You know, the basics, of course, are hardware is very difficult to upgrade in the field. Software assumes that you can make changes very easily, that you just, you know, update it and you can make changes. Software, we don't have to worry too much about cross disciplines. Hardware, we have to worry about people that speak literally different languages, mechanical, electrical, and software, as well as test, regulations, all kinds of different language and hardware that we need to come together. As you mentioned in the chat earlier, the need for schedules. Schedules are absolutely critical in hardware for multiple reasons. And in the some of the key reasons it's different, looking at the bottom here, if you've ever been in the decision making, in the leadership of a hardware company versus software company, the discussions are very different. How you do portfolio management, very different. So for hardware, every single product that I'm going to create or release is almost thought about distinctly. It's got its own business case. You have to determine for any given product, what's the market, what's the customers, what's the applications, and you're trading off against other ideas for products. And as soon as you kick one off, you've got all these constraints. You've got not just a schedule constraint, but you've got capital cost constraints, variable costs, schedule, feature priorities, which features are going in. And once I make these decisions, we have to live with them. We often can't update them in the field. It's got to be holistic. These things have to come together. We can't incrementally build a product, you know, feature by feature in hardware, because one feature often touches on other features, and everything has to work together. So you're never going to develop a car seat independently of the controls of the car seat, because they have to work together, you know. And some products we can modularize a little bit, but a lot of them are very holistic, and every feature touches every other feature in terms of a customer experience. So it's just completely different, and sometimes that's hard to explain to folks on why the Agile for software tactics can't work for hardware. And all of these come together in terms of why we struggle. So what we see often is that when hardware teams are thinking about Agile, their first effort is say, hey, it works for our software teams. Let's write user stories, let's prioritize them, let's time box it, and we're going to do dedicated teams, and they'll do all the things they think are right for software, and then immediately say it doesn't work for hardware, because they're trying to immediately apply the tactics. And so if that doesn't work, then they'll treat Agile purely as development execution by just time boxing. They'll say, okay, Agile does 2-week sprints, we're going to do 2-week sprints. So they'll treat it purely as kind of an execution task of, okay, let's write our PRDs, we're going to define our work, but we're going to define it in 2-week buckets. And that's their world of Agile. And then they don't get the results that they're expecting them, and that's usually because they don't really understand what it means to have the Agile mindset, how to get the benefits of Agile. So hardware is very different, and if we apply software tactics directly to hardware, we get this kind of profile. We actually go down in project governance, because that if you just apply software tactics, you have the challenge, where's the schedule? There is no governance. People throw the governance out the window, and then immediately people say, well, shoot, Agile doesn't work for hardware. Collaboration will go a little bit higher typically than traditional, because the teams are forced to work together, often those time boxes. Innovation often goes down because they're not thinking about things in a certain way. It comes and goes on that one. The big benefit they really get is they get a little more transparency, because they are working in more time boxes. Risk management actually goes down a little bit. And so you do get a little bit of benefit in one area, but you actually lose benefits in other areas, like the risk management and governance. So that's the reason that we see a lot of teams have tried, we've seen for years, they've tried to apply Agile directly to hardware. They keep trying it, and then it just doesn't work. And so eventually they often give up and just make the statement, doesn't work for hardware. So there is a better way. And I think, we started this journey, and we'll talk through this a little bit, pretty soon after Agile, and because the principles are so solid and sound, and there had to be a way to make the tactics work. And so that's been our focus for quite a while, and we know that it works. So Matt, if you're not familiar with the acronym, is Modified Agile for Hardware Development Framework. And when we say hardware, we'll talk about the types of products we mean, but it's an Agile-based framework and focused on the principles. And we want to integrate proven hardware development strategies and best practices. We don't want to give that up, but we want to build on Agile principles to make it work, and Agile tactics to make it work for hardware to get those benefits of efficiency, speed, and innovation even, and optimize customer value. And it's got to be in a way that supports and works with hardware teams and doesn't create the overhead and add work with no benefits. So we know all that has to come together. So let's look at some of the key elements and particularly what's different. And I'll introduce this a little bit, and then Vishal is going to take over. And when we say hardware, everything has to typically, or everything today often includes hardware, firmware. I'm sorry, software and firmware. You can't really do a complex system or any sophisticated hardware today that doesn't include some form of software. So we often mean the integration of hardware and software, but it's almost always going to have some form of electronics, mechanical, physical components that have to get produced. And that often means suppliers and vendors we got to work with. We're often in hardware projects, you don't have dedicated resources. That's another one where I might have a fraction of a mechanical engineer, a fraction of a system engineer, and they're going to work on 3 different projects. So we still need Agile tactics that make things like that work. So the beast of hardware is just different, and we want to make it work. So we're really often, one simple way to think about it is take some of the advantages of waterfall, that governance structure, understanding of schedules, understanding of risk, understanding of dependencies, and then bring in Agile principles with the teams and the collaboration and transparency, and then pull the best of both of these worlds together. And in a sense, that's one thing that we've focused on in the MAHD framework. So it's going to look like neither one of them completely, and it's not going to look like both of them tied together. It's going to be almost something completely new in a way. And we've often even debated, should we even use the words agile? Because it's building on agile principles, but the tactics really don't look as much like Scrum as a lot of people expect. And so that creates some interesting discussions on what we really mean by agile. And if you think about what agile means in terms of autonomous teams, how to use rapid or learning and execution cycles, how to integrate risk built into the process, make better decisions, be more flexible. Those are all Agile principles that we build on, and we're just building in tactics. And some are directly related to Agile, and some of them are going to be other ones that work from known best practices in hardware, and we bring those together, built on those Agile principles into the MAHD framework. So this has been quite a journey for us. We've certainly enjoyed it. We started working through this as early as 2016 formally, began trialing it with customers. It was formulated a couple years before that and just getting started with trialing it. Officially launched it 2017. We're up to MAHD 4.0. We're going to release next year. And we can see kind of the evolution of MAHD as well. We try to apply Agile principles to the process of MAHD itself. And a lot of it's through trialing with real companies. The first official company that actually used the formal MAHD framework 1.0 was actually Lego, and not the building blocks themselves, but the I forget what they called it now. The team that has all the electronics and the robotics part of Lego. So we're excited to work with them. That helped refine it and worked with a wide range of companies since then to keep refining it, prove it works. So we're going to share with you what it is today a little bit, and we're looking forward to your feedback on it and from your experience. We often, when you get started, it's really about project excellence, but we know with hardware, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of it comes down to project selection too. Hardware Challenge is all about managing resources across which development projects, and that comes down to portfolio management as well, and also large systems we have to think about. So Often a company might have the very simplest of cost reduction projects, a very small team, might be 2 or 3 people, up to entirely new complex products or systems that might be hundreds of people, and we need something that is scalable for that. So that's part of the complete MAHD framework, and we won't go too much into that today, but that includes everything from product portfolio management for project selection. Often, hardware teams do a lot of innovation investigation. Is this a good technology? If we develop this product, it's an idea. Is there a market for it? Those are really innovation pipeline management considerations that it's not an approved project yet, but we still have to work through it to determine if it's something that we want to do. And all of these should be able to be managed in an agile way with a similar framework. All the way through, the last thing is sustaining engineering. And so to make sure that once it's in the field, that we're still applying agile principles to get the benefits of consistency across the entire product life cycle. So we're not going to go through too much of that depth today, but we do want to focus on the core project MAHD and share with you a little bit how that's different than Agile. A lot of companies are going MAHD, as I mentioned, a lot of different industries. So we're enjoying one of the things we really like about it in general is that we get to see things from so many perspectives, everything from large earth moving equipment, down to very high tech integrated circuitry. And most companies have very similar challenges. How do you organize work? How do you get started in the right direction? How do you be efficient? How do the teams work together to collaborate? From a process perspective, they're all very similar. But of course, the details have to be worked through team by team, company by company sometimes. So just to finalize before Vishal takes us over a little bit is the outcomes. We often see the number one things companies are looking for is speed. And so we typically see 25 to 50% faster from concept to product release, which we love seeing that. And usually there is almost always zero decline in customer value and usually higher customer value because they're able to focus. They're able to focus on the right capabilities, the right features that are really going to drive customer value. So they get that speed, that efficiency, and the predictability. We'll talk about how do you get that predictability and get better predictability than traditional waterfall, which is we find fascinating in that. A lot of companies are trying to stay ahead of competition, and a big one is aligning hardware and software processes that most company software process has already gone agile. Their hardware is typically something and still like a stage gate, and now they're working in 2 different worlds. How do we align those? And that's something that can happen. And I mentioned predictability. One of the things too that we like to really share is how fast it can be learned. I mentioned that if you try to apply software tactics directly to hardware, they can kind of get the concepts quickly, but when they start applying it, there's a mismatch. And that mismatch starts taking months, sometimes years to really get. And what they'll do is they'll start massaging in a way that works for them anyway. And if they do make it work, they almost start looking a little bit more like what they should have done from the beginning to modify it for their purposes. So once you get the tactics right for how hardware teams can understand them, they actually can be learned very quickly and they see the benefits very quickly. So that's something that we've worked hard on to make sure that happens. So just to summarize this, it is agile principles. The teams focus on short execution cycles. They work through incremental solutions. We'll talk through a little bit about rapid prototyping, what that looks like. And then we really need to think about how you modify these tactics. We have to accommodate project schedules. How do you manage cross-discipline integration? We have to think about prototyping a little bit differently. Software, I can just develop finished features. I can put them in a release. I can test them. I could even release it to the market if I wanted to. We can't do that, but we need to think about how do we do rapid prototyping. We often call it demonstrable output. To get feedback and learn something. It doesn't have to be a fully functioning anything. It could be anything. So we'll talk through that a little bit. Our backlog's going to look different. We're going to have external vendors and suppliers we need to think about. And I mentioned earlier, shared resources, our subject matter experts that might be across different projects we have to accommodate. So All right, I know I went through all that very quickly. I'm going to monitor chat a little bit. Let's pause a little bit, Vishal, if you don't mind, before we jump into the what are we talking about more specifically. Any of that resonate? Did it make sense that are you seeing similar challenges with waterfall stage gate? I'm going to bring that back up real quick because this is kind of the core of the starting point. Most companies is that they have a stage gate process or some sort of waterfall. And it makes all these assumptions up front, very long front ends, very little room for collaboration, or it's not built in. And then you've got this really often things that the learning happens really late. Any thoughts, comments, anybody from what I shared?
I was looking for the button to raise my hand, but
Oh, you can just talk, yeah.
I'll just
Yeah.
make an editorial comment here that as bad as these problems are with stage gate processes in other industries, in the medical device industry, the problems are multiplied. So the late learning that happens to the right side of this diagram starts to loop in a bunch of either regulatory submissions or clinical validation or other very expensive activities. So you can have huge cost overruns because of that late learning.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We can put that high cost on big bold for different industries. Absolutely.
So, one other component, if it's in industrial spaces, is that you have an enormous customer hardware partner lifecycle, right? The center of the gravity isn't often the MPD process first. It's the customer's specialized requirements and and typically unique custom industrial processes that have to be met, many of which aren't even fully understood because they might be going through a new plant life cycle. So there's a lot of moving pieces. So and they tend to have well, at best, you get to collaborate with them on their product partner life cycles. At worst, it's dictated to you, right? It's one of the reasons my experience is across Rockwell, Siemens, and Emerson, because it sort of covers, I'd say, almost all a big chunk of the world. Let's put it that way, because each customer has specialized relationships, sunk cost, tech debt, all that stuff, skills, and they aren't necessarily open or can be really to a transformation of the hardware lifecycle. I mean, on the edge, right? So I've found the last 10, 15 years, everyone sort of plays on the edge because the edge tends to be less critical. But when you get closer to the critical systems, the SCADA, MES type system, the execution systems, the statistical control systems, the core sensor infrastructure, there's not a lot of movement that you're generally, or freedom of movement that you have, and so you're sort of let's say innovating. Even there's some innovation theater going on inside there, but your movement is very constrained to what those platforms have, and a lot of times those platforms have huge constraints, right, in their own software, their own hardware interfaces, etc. So so those tend to be this it's like diamond geologic pressure of constraints that's like put on the MPD team. And so I do think that upfront area, one of the reasons it takes so long is all of those constraints.
Absolutely. No, and you're absolutely right. And I think that's very valid when
Sorry for being so long-winded. It's always layered and all that stuff. So
because it's a big problem. It's hard to describe succinctly. You're absolutely right.
Just this
So
week, we were at a customer where basically they said we have a reference implementation we have to follow. So how do
Yep.
we innovate?
yeah.
That's right.
Well,
That's
in
right.
Agile, when we get to the MAD framework next, it's all it is really a problem-solving framework at the end of the day, and and the problem starts with the constraints, and so you have to build those in. And I think when executives say, "Oh, Agile's not for hardware," anybody says Agile's not for hardware, they assume you can't manage constraints in an Agile way of working, but you have to manage them. One. And two, all it is that's setting up the problem, and then we can leverage Agile techniques. It's okay to have constraints. Those are constraints
yeah.
that become part of the problem we're solving.
Yeah. So one area I do think is a huge opening for this approach, without going to war with the installed infrastructure, is that up front there tends to be this sort of kicking it around phase of a year, 2 years, sometimes 3 years, where it's proof of concepts, MVPs, pilots, R&D prototypes, whatever the language every shop uses to say basically the same thing, non-production ready tries. That's kind of what it is. And I think in that area, this could be very, very powerful, because people, to be blunt, don't really use NPD in those areas because it doesn't make sense to roll out this big monster, and you don't have the support anyways. There's not the NPD team to support you if you're doing it, so people don't do it anyways. So actually giving them a process is, I think, a win. The other area, like if you go back to that, or you had your methodology laid out there, all the different phases, is that the post-production area, MPD,
back to stage gate.
Yeah, right there. Yeah. Oh, you just had it. So when you look at market acceptance, the truth is there's like inside 5 and 6, a huge set of, we'll just call it quality, stabilization, standardized releases. I mean, that could be like 5 years, right? Until it really stabilizes, till it's safe, not Agile safe, sorry, but until it's, until it's good, until everyone recognizes, oh, you're using an X103, of course, right? Like it gets that degree of acceptance. And inside that place, MPD doesn't really work, because it's almost like that front end piece, because you're doing all these minor micro releases, kind of a lot of
almost call it the fuzzy back end.
Yeah. I mean, basically break fix. Let's just be real with it, and enhancements, right? So it's break fix, enhancements. You're making these sort of custom dev decisions, right? Like, okay, we're selling this to Toyota, so even if they ask for something minor, we're going to put it in the product because Toyota asked for it. But we might be selling it to a very custom tool and die shop, and they want something major, and we're like, yeah, no one else is going to use that. It's just custom for them. It's a bolt-on, right? So you have a lot of those kind of calls.
Exactly. So you brought up why portfolio management and project selection decisions are equally important to specific project details.
Right. That's right. So I think your processes really can be powerful on the early front end, and definitely post whatever we'll call release 1, GA1, whatever you want to call it.
Well, let's go through it a little bit and talk through then, see, because I'm not sure folks even understand what we're talking about with the process.
Probably not. I probably lost them. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, you sounds like you have a pretty good understanding already of what it would entail, but I'm guessing a lot of folks.
Sasha, you wanted to say something before I jump in?
Yes, let me put my participant hat on.
Yeah.
And follow the rules. So that's why I have a question. So agility was introduced at the end of the 20th century in response to our society going from the industrial era into the digital era. In the industrial era, we were happy to plan and predict, and it was working. In 21st century, we learn it doesn't work, and that's why we introduced sense and respond approach of agility.
Mhm.
So what I was looking for, how this framework would accommodate sense and respond approach.
Mhm.
How does it allow us for experimentation and mistakes?
Yep,
Thank you.
perfect. Excellent.
So I
Excellent.
think as I go through the next few slides, hopefully that answers it. Otherwise, obviously, please stop me. But I know I need to address that, so definitely we'll point that out.
Yeah.
Okay, so I am going to dive into some more details. Thank you for your questions, comments. Always helpful. It helps us guide what we want to talk about as presenters. So real quick, I think, with hardware, people dabble, they try out the software because Agile works for software, and then they kind of run into issues, challenges, and then they get burned, jaded a little bit, which is all fair. It makes sense to kind of be, hey, this is too hard or this doesn't work. So there's a natural skepticism to just trying Agile things out once they try other tactics. So generally speaking, right, it's with any change, as I'm sure you all are aware. You want to take it slow. You want to kind of try some pilots, get comfortable, figure out the tactics, get comfortable with the tactics. So I'm going to dive into, if you can go to the next slide, please. All right. So there are, in our opinion, obviously Matt has a lot of little subtle nuggets that allows, and these have all kind of evolved since 2016. But that kind of helps make MAHD work in the Agile hardware space. So if you could click through, please. Dorian, can you click through, please?
Yeah, not coming up.
Nope. Okay.
Okay, I see them all. You don't
All
see
right,
it?
cool. Sorry, there we go.
Okay.
Okay, so there are three key areas that we would like to touch upon. The first is the on-ramp. As if you talk to any hardware team, advanced planning is critical for success. They don't like, hey, let's just jump in, start building and see what happens, which is absolutely fair. As we talked about, there's it's lots of components that have to come together. You have to have the holistic view. So the on-ramp in MAHD is a series of rapid collaborative activities to initiate a project and to come up with a directional plan. There are 5 steps, and we'll kind of touch upon those in a little bit. But the idea is at a high level, the on-ramp allows the team to get together to collaboratively figure out what's the strategic direction and where they need to focus. The second step is what we call as our IPAC iterations. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But that's where all the planning and the execution for rapid iterations happen in hardware. As you can see, there's 2 levels. There's the system level or the higher level, the IPAC iteration, and then you potentially can have sprints within that, within swim lanes and within multiple subsystems. And the third is about managing an aligned backlog that focuses on the prioritized integrated work items and how execution would happen, how compliance, traceability, all of those other things, and how do you bring more people, how do you scale with multiple teams, multiple subsystems, and multiple individuals participating. Next slide, please. So we'll dive into a little bit more about each one of those. Sorry, I'm kind of missing something. Okay, so this is so on the on-ramp, right? How did it come about? So and this is before I had met Dorian, but he had been called upon as a consultant at a company that was developing or trying to develop an innovative entertainment device. Software and hardware teams were trying to learn Agile in parallel, and pretty quickly the software teams were up and running. They were writing user stories, managing backlogs, demonstrating code. And the hardware teams were like, hey, where's the architecture? What are we building? Where's our requirements? And so they started to kind of like want to immediately fall back to waterfall because that was comfortable. So what was missing in that approach was getting alignment with what does the customer want? What are the outcomes we're looking for? What would the solution framework look like? And that was the genesis of MAHD on-ramp. Again, like I mentioned, it's a series of activities. There are 5 steps. And they're very collaborative with the right team members to clarify customer needs and kind of identifying just enough understanding of the solution. So the key difference is the team is not trying to figure everything out up front. With the agile mindset, it's about using the principle of just enough to say, what do we really need to know up front? What are the big rocks? What are the big areas of value or risk that we need to focus on and start moving in the right direction towards success? So that's one of the key aspects of on-ramp, is to allow the team to kind of move a little bit quickly, but in the right direction. Next slide, please. So, typically, as we talked about, right, the front end of the NPD in waterfall, traditional, stage gate approaches, this is, the team's trying to figure out everything as much as possible up front. There's an assumption, there's plenty of assumptions baked in. There's a lot of negotiations on paper and so on and so forth. And by the time the detailed work breakdown comes through, tends to be many, many months. If you could click, please. So the MAHD approach is about, essentially, as we mentioned, setting up the problem to solve, and then collaborating as a team to solve the problem. So in the same time, typically, that the gate documents or reviews might take, and in fact, it's actually much less than that, teams are able to start working through the major areas of risk with early prototypes, and being able to engage customers, even getting some feedback, clarifying some of the key project trade-offs. So the good thing is they're either, the team is able to get onto a fast start in the right direction. The result ends up being a much more predictable schedule as they go further along, because they've essentially addressed all the big issues and the big rocks and the big value. And plus, they've kind of had the opportunity to align with customer feedback, so that they're not assuming things as you typically would do in PRDs and SRDs and things like that. It's more about, so again, the agile principle here is the learn by doing.
Yeah, I think one of the big objections often is, oh, you have to develop a nearly functional prototype every sprint in Agile, and that's not absolutely not one approach anyone should take, but also that in the MAHD framework, for example, a prototype is anything that can be leveraged for learning. It could be a paper prototype, 3D model, could be whatever the team is. We'll talk about vertical slices a little bit later, but just want to clarify that when we say prototype, it's not a nearly fully functioning solution.
Yep. So basically, the on-ramp itself, it's a fast start in the right direction, like we mentioned. There was a particular team that we work with that was initiating a project for a process control solution. So relatively, maybe a couple, 3 months ago, 4 months ago. But the product manager, a very good product manager, actually, very smart, energetic, but he had spent many, many months writing detailed requirements, about 400 or so, and he actually showed it to us. And then, they started holding meetings every week to go through stuff. And then there would be questions back and forth. Do we really need this? Is there, a better way? They were already starting to make trade-offs during just the initial understanding of what they would need to build. So basically, they worked more than a couple months, 3 months, and they had literally only worked through some of the requirements. But again, this is something that's hopefully not typical, but we hear it plenty of times. But the challenge is that there's a lot of assumptions that need to be made. And one of the things we say is we try to avoid using the word requirements, because requirements tend to mean that the problem and the solution. And what we want to do is basically have the product folks focus more on the understanding of the needs and the value and the problem statement, and the engineering team focus on breaking it apart and figuring that out. How do you make a better product that hits the customer needs? Can you click, please? What we do with MAHD is break this into two parts, the concept of requirements. So the first is to get clarity on customer needs. through what we call as the MAHD user stories. These are different from the Scrum user stories. They're essentially a much higher level, and that essentially described what is the user need, what is the sort of the use case or the problem statement from a user perspective. And then you identify a solution framework, which is essentially what we call as our product attributes, to look for areas of success and failure. And there's connections that we look at as part of the on-ramp to say, hey, what do we really need to focus on? What are the big areas or capabilities we need to think about when we're trying to address certain user needs? And then based on that, the team essentially comes up with, hey, these are the biggest areas of risk, the big rocks. And then from that, they start building a initial iteration plan. Can you click? And basically, what the result was that they would work through the top areas of concern in a matter of days. So the big difference is by focusing on where the big rocks are, where the big opportunities for innovation might be, where the constraints are, being honest and practical about, hey, these are our constraints. We can't really work around these. So as you start defining the skeleton for your solution, you keep those constraints front and center and say, hey, I have a reference design. There's not a whole lot I can do. And so use that to kind of continue to build a solution. But the good thing is they were able to quickly move forward in a couple, 3 weeks. They had enough understanding so that all sides were happy that they would evolve. Sorry. Hey, I'm on a call. Sorry. Sorry about that. I thought I had it turned off, but anyways, the point is that from a situation where they were going through hundreds of requirements, negotiating, going back and forth, within a couple of weeks, they were in a position where they had a clear direction about where they needed to go, where the trade-offs needed to be, where the key areas of opportunity and innovation might be. Next slide, please. So this is, and this was the question that was asked earlier. To think about. So this is what we call as our IPAC iterations. IPAC stands for integration, prototype, alignment, and customer engagement. The idea is that every IPAC iteration, you're looking to prototype and learn. And like Dorian mentioned, the level of prototype can vary. The fidelity of the prototype can vary. Depending on what area or discipline you're within. Sometimes getting a board takes a little longer, and that's okay. So you kind of plan around that. Those are the constraints. Integration is like, hey, what things will come together? How do you build a vertical slice to demonstrate and to integrate and to see how things are going to come together? Alignment with potentially third parties, alignment with your vendors, alignment with other groups, and then most importantly with your customers. How do you engage with your customers to get feedback? And the best thing is when you have something to show, even if it's a brochure, even if it's like a box made of cardboard, visual things help the customer provide better feedback to say, hey, oh yeah, this is great. This is what I was thinking. This might work. This might not work. And so that's the intent, is to kind of look at what can we build, the right things that we can build. So we already talked about the big rocks and stuff. The prototyping strategy is an important outcome from the on-ramp. So as part of the iteration planning, the team will come up with a prototyping strategy. And again, not everything needs a prototype. If it's a simple or low-risk project that you already understand much of, it's fine. But whenever you have some innovation opportunity or areas, it can be something, like we mentioned, it could be 3D model, brochure. So the key is to align the fidelity of the prototype to what the team is trying to learn. The big difference is typically, the connotation with the prototype is it'll be working, it'll be final, it'll be like something people can kind of do end-to-end work with. What we recommend is that, hey, what do you need to learn? What's your big rock? What's your big unknown? To learn that, to uncover that, what do you need to do? And so the fidelity of the prototype should kind of match that to say, hey, we can do this much and we'll learn what we need to learn for now. And then you kind of build on it over time. And we'll kind of talk about how that works as well. I talked about vertical slices. So again, the solution emerges. So as you do various levels of fidelity of the prototype, as you start putting and integrating some of these prototypes together into vertical slices, your solution starts emerging. And the good thing is that a huge benefit is that you will see things working together much, much sooner rather than waiting for integration at the end. Typically, a lot of testing and integration in the hardware world happens towards the end, at which point, if things blow up, it's a huge challenge. That's where, difficult decisions end up having to be made, pushing out time and so on and so forth. So the other little thing that I want to call out is that, the big iterations that you see, the outer blocks, the duration of those can be flexible. So the team can kind of say, hey, you know what, I'm going to have to get a board built this time. It's going to take me 6 weeks to get that, so they can adjust the duration of the iteration. So, but it's all about learning, right? So the mindset is, hey, what do we need to learn? What is the unknown? How can we address that in the quickest, simplest, fastest way? And what's that going to look like? So that we can start putting it together along with the rest of the system and see how it all behaves. One of the things that also with hardware, right, the gate reviews, they're not going to go away, right? The governance model in most hardware organizations doesn't go away just because they want to try Agile. So the good thing with MAHD, because of the way the iterations and things work and the way the planning works, the iteration plan and all, teams are always ready for a gate review. So they don't need to spend a lot of time on long preparation sessions, writing documents that basically never get used again. But the team is always working on what's important. They're able to clearly communicate and even demonstrate where they are, what's coming up next. And a lot, for the most part, management really appreciates that much better than a work breakdown structure. So I don't know if anyone's raised hands or not, but I'm just gonna keep going unless someone stops me. And
Yeah,
all right.
I'm watching the chat, Vishal.
Okay. All right, cool.
Raising their hand.
So this, sorry, Shasha, I'll stop. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. There is usually a connection between software architecture and with agile approach. That's why the idea of microservices was introduced, so that you could, and because of that, you could do iterative development. How this, and I see an example of something very similar with SpaceX, for example. It's what they are doing is really, really smart. They don't test the entire system.
Right.
They blow up certain components, minimizing risk by this way.
Yeah.
My question is, how you are addressing this approach with your framework? Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Vishal, and I'll weigh in.
All right, so I think the prototypes that we mentioned, right? Like I said, multiple levels of fidelity, and I think let me explain this slide, and I think as part of that explanation, I'll be able to kind of cover what you're thinking. So real quick, this is a very visual, very interesting slide. Sort of captures the entire MAHD idea in the sense that how does progress happen? So as I mentioned, on the top left, we have what we call as a vision brief, describes the strategic intent. Hey, what's the main things that what problems are we trying to solve, for whom, what's the competitive nature of this thing? That the team kind of comes together real quick, does the on-ramp where they figure out a directional to say, hey, what are the big pieces or the big areas of that we need to learn about, the big rocks, the big unknowns, the big innovation opportunities, and then they literally get started right after. What typically, similar to what we do in Agile, right, in software areas, the team doesn't necessarily build a backlog for the whole thing. They do just enough. And so they might plan out the first iteration and maybe a little bit of the second iteration. The key thing here is if you look at the picture, initially, because they have unknowns, there's going to be a lot more investigations as they try to learn through prototyping, rapid prototyping, what does that look like? And this is sort of along the lines of what you mentioned with Tesla, right? They do components, they do hey, what do we need to learn first, and then they'll even do the testing and validation. So they start with a theory, which is exactly what we're saying as well. You start with options, you start with analyzing those, you decide, hey, what do we need to test? So you diverge a little bit in terms of your solutions, and you eliminate the solutions that don't solve the key unknown or the key innovation opportunity you're looking at, and you start converging to start making decisions. So again, you're not building the entire system at this point initially to try and figure out. So what happens is, if you kind of look at the picture, you start with bigger areas where there's more opportunity, more unknowns. So there might be more time spent initially on diverging into multiple solutions, exploring solutions, validating the ones that work, and then converging on decisions. As you go further along, what happens is your unknowns start reducing. So it's the idea of the big rocks, right? If you're trying to fill up a jar, you start with the big rocks, then you do the little pebbles, and then you do the sand. Similar to that, the idea is you explore different solutions for the big things first. Not everything needs to have that divergence convergence cycle. And as you go further along, what you're going to find is that you need less and less of the investigations, because you've figured out most of your unknowns. You're going to have more of the more completed work, more clear work. Typically about, in a few iterations, most teams will have enough clarity about what they're going to have to do next, because they've handled all the big stuff, all the hard stuff. And so now they can focus on things that they're pretty much familiar with. We do in Agile, we talk about effort, complexity, unknowns. And so if you address most of the unknowns, effort and complexity, most teams know what to do with. And so that's where the predictability starts going up significantly. Especially in hardware, you want to have frozen designs and things. So we also have this concept of strategic flexibility, where maybe there is some unknown that you haven't fully figured out. So you might leave that aspect open as you continue to work through it. But everything else you start locking down. So you could potentially even freeze 90% of the design, 95% of the design, because you figured those things out. Maybe there's one or two areas that you kind of on purpose leave open because you need to do a little bit more validation, and so on and so forth. So again, hopefully this picture helps explain that. I'm going to pause because this is actually very powerful to explain the MAHD concept.
Let me address your question a little more directly, Sasha, as well. So if you look at SpaceX, Tesla, cars, etc., they kind of naturally have subsystems and things that can kind of break down, and you can innovate and prototype independently. Not all hardware products have the natural boundaries of things, or even if you try to force boundaries, they don't often work or add expense and challenges. So we need a flexible framework that can work from the simplest to the most complex, that we can break down that way. And that's one of the goals of the on-ramp. Part of the prototype strategy is to think about the architecture in a way that, how do we carve things off so that we could either innovate independently and prototype subsystems, et cetera, or do we have to treat it more holistic? Does that make sense?
We can't hear you, Sasha.
Breaking up. I'm sorry, we can't. You're coming up. And Vishal, just from the time check, we got about 4 minutes. I wonder if we could hit a couple highlights and then just offer a opportunity to learn more.
Sure. All right. I think any thoughts on this slide? I think since we've kept it interactive, this might trigger some thoughts. Okay.
I was just going to say, I think it's a great slide because it actually captures a lot of information at once that people seem to, in my experience, get confused about. And I like the color coding there, because there's still, you could still tell people we're doing design iterations, and they still think, oh, well, there's no more unknowns. It's like, right. or the reverse, where it's like green all the way out, and it's like, no, you need to ship product at the end of this. Either extreme is crazy.
That's right. Well, I think in the key concept of strategic flexibility, it's, if you want to accept the risk to keep innovating, that's a strategic decision. But we need a framework to do that. And if the schedule is really critical, we're going to make that decision earlier. And again, all this is a problem-solving framework to allow things to evolve quicker, make better decisions, get more collaborative about it, more transparent about it, better customer executive alignment across the board. And all of that enables efficiency, being faster and higher customer value. It's just tackling the problem in a different way.
All right. So next slide, please. So real quick, I guess, we can try to wrap up quick. But, this is an example where a customer essentially said, hey, my goal is more about improving margins. So, well, this one's actually about faster time to market. The idea was, again, the on-ramp literally helped this organization innovate faster, build a prototype in 6 months, do some trial launches with beta customers, and actually launch the product in 15 months compared to what used to be about 24 months. So much faster time to market, much more product that kind of hit the mark. The last quick thing was on the backlog. I already mentioned that the third big piece is essentially an aligned backlog, which allows, this is more about execution. Honestly, one of the easiest pieces in the sense that most people know how to work with epics and tasks and subtasks and swim lanes and such, which is but the idea is that you want to capture activities together. This particular company wanted higher margins. They were happy with the speed of their work, but they wanted higher, so they focused on more about on the margins to say how do we kind of get early feedback so that we can get to better margins and more predictability as well. But this is the main thing, right? I think one thing we have enjoyed or we feel about MAHD is that, most traditional projects, because all the hard work is done up front, the assumption is that, oh, wow, we've kind of have a work breakdown structure, which means, oh, the risk is low. And then you start executing and risk tends to pile up. You kind of capture it in risk registers. You try to focus where you can. A lot of the work typically is not prioritized. Sometimes it is, with MVPs and stuff. But there's harder decisions that end up having to be made. Like I mentioned, integration happens later in the cycle, testing happens later. You tend to end up, making difficult decisions. Instead, the approach with MAHD is to say, hey, let's identify the biggest areas of risk first. Consciously, let's address those big rocks by learning. So we learn by doing, prototyping, validation, divergence, convergence, as I mentioned. And then once you get to a point where you've kind of addressed some of the big stuff, you're literally on a path where you can be extremely predictable. And that's for every project, this is the goal. How do you get faster and more predictable?
Yeah, so that's I think the big irony is that you can actually get higher predictability with Agile, but the challenge and the big message for executives when they first do it, if you are at day 0 of this project and management's saying, you need to tell me what's the scope, what's the schedule, and I'm going to hold you to that. They have to learn in an Agile approach that, no, we're going to talk about what's the market gap. We're going to talk about problem we're going to solve. We're going to work for a short amount of time. We're going to give you a ballpark schedule that might be plus or minus, and then we're going to show you how we're going to get to a better answer. And in this time frame, we're going to give you much more detailed or more accurate, maybe not more detailed, but a much more accurate schedule that has much lower risk to it. So it's the executive conversation does have to happen. But usually once it happens and they understand it, they get pretty excited about it because they know the old way. Even if the team promises a certain scope and a certain schedule, what do they do? They'll just pad it and they'll add 6 months anyway. So it becomes this interesting group sandbagging, almost organization sandbagging of trying to outdo each other on estimating scope, schedule, resources, etc. Where we're saying right up front, we don't know everything yet, but we have ideas. We know we have a framework for it. We can give you estimates for this, but they're going to have a lot of variability. But we have a process to work through it so that you're going to get more predictability very soon. And you're going to be part of that process, executive, et cetera. And so that's I think the big irony of Agile is that it actually means executive needs better. They often just don't really fully appreciate that. You can't really comprehend it until they see a project evolve.
We have a couple more slides, so I'm going to go through those relatively quickly. So again, as we all know, Agile doesn't mean it's ad hoc. It actually means more discipline. The big thing is that, it's about getting familiar or comfortable with unknowns. It's about learning by doing, short cycles, and, empowering the teams to be able to make the decisions that they need to make in the best interest or the best outcomes, and, kind of tight customer feedback loops as well. So MAD kind of focuses on all of those, kind of kind of incorporates anything, all of those into the mix, which are all Agile principles. The tactics might be slightly different to adapt to hardware environments, but the intent is the same. And at the end of the day, without the Agile mindset, it's easy to fall back to waterfall. There's a lot of coaching involved there. The profile, we do feel in our experience that MAD tries to optimize across all of those areas on the spider chart. So there's plenty of good stuff that we've seen. Obviously, if there's other opinions, we're happy to kind of discuss those. But we do feel pretty strongly that this is a good balanced approach. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the last slide. There was a question I saw earlier, like, will we be sent a copy of the presentation? Happy to do that. If you don't mind, please share your email via chat or visit our website. You can email us. A few things I did want to quickly point out, just because I know we breezed through a lot of content. The Intro to MAD ebook is about 20 pages. You can download it from the website pretty easily. Gets a lot more details. There's also a 4-minute video that again visually kind of helps explain what MAD's about. And we had done a white paper some time ago about comparison, scaling comparison for hardware organizations and how MAD, SAFe, all of that kind of might compare. So all of those are available from the website. We can email them, whatever works for you. And that's pretty much it. So we thank you for your time. Sorry, we went a few minutes over. Do we, Sasha, is it okay to stick around for questions?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have questions, I think you could stay 5-10 extra minutes if people have questions.
Yeah. Just open up your mic and share, or again, the easiest way is just put your email in chat, and then we can send you those resources if you're interested.
What I could offer, if you send your materials to me, I could put them on a shared drive and share the link to the MeetUp messages.
Yeah, that'd be great.
If you feel comfortable with that.
Yep, happy to do that. So we'll share this presentation as well as some of the resources to learn more.
I think Aaron had something.
So what does the engagement model look like? If so let's say I find a company that I think could really use your technique. And by the way, I think about half my clients probably could. What does it look like in terms of how you work with a company?
Aaron, sorry to interrupt, but I think can we take that offline if you don't mind? If you don't mind emailing one of us, please.
Oh, sure.
I know this was meant to be a knowledge sharing session, so I don't want to, talk business, I suppose.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's the rules of our MeetUp group. But I'm sure you will have a chance to continue the conversation. Aaron, do you have folk emails of both?
I can contact you through the website, right?
Yeah. We're easy to find, Vishal or Dorian at madframework.com.
Okay. Yeah. So I've heard most of sort of, I guess, what I've learned academically about this subject goes back to the Playbook. I think it was Playbook HQ consultants. So they had like a whole series of blogs on Agile for hardware. There's sort of knowledge-driven product development, which gives a lot of the right incentives, but doesn't actually give the practical aspects. It says how you should think about this, but not what you should do.
Right.
There was some years ago presentations by John Carter and Kevin Thompson and forget the Scott Elliott on this subject, and so a lot of interesting things. But what I liked about what you guys have done is you put it together into a very clear framework. Like in a few slides, it's really clear what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're dead on, and it's been certainly a focus of ours. I read, 1,000 pages of like scaled agile framework for enterprise safe, and 998 is software focused, and two pages of it also works for hardware. Here's how you do it, and it just confuses teams more. So we get a little frustrated by the hey, here's the concepts, they should work, go try them. And then teams get frustrated when they actually try to apply the tactics. So we appreciate those comments.
And looking at what you folks presented, I was asking myself, is it applicable to the software? And I feel like it makes perfect sense to start with unknowns, to minimize the risk up front, to focus on learning. It's all could be perfectly applicable to software as well.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you for that too, because what we've seen is often when we work with somebody, their software team is already Agile or Scrum or something. Hardware teams adopt MAHD. Then they'll say, "What are you guys doing in the on-ramp? What is that focus matrix you guys are doing?" They'll see that early planning, and they'll say, "Well, shoot, we get benefits from that." So they'll adapt some of the tactics from MAHD framework. You could absolutely run a software project 100% MAHD. It's just a problem-solving process approach. Yeah.
There was a comment from Courtney about a little confused about how the correct inputs first, how would that work, the stage gate aspect, since we did mention that, teams are always ready.
Right.
But we come across this every day. So Dorian, do you want to take that one?
Actually, it's funny that you mentioned that. Can you see my screen? We don't want to go to all these details too much. But if you think about how you manage projects, very specifically, we're getting very tactical here, but you're always going to consider system deliverables. You have to consider things like documentation. Hardware needs documentation. Hardware needs bill of materials. Hardware needs drawings. Hardware needs manufacturing tests, needs test fixtures. We need that stuff. And so all that stuff has to get developed as part of a project. We let the team determine what's the right point to do it. Manufacturing is obviously brought in as early as makes sense for really tight projects with high needs for manufacturing. They're going to come in from the very beginning, which means they might create early draft of manufacturing test plans, etc. So what we do is we want the project needs to dictate when all these things happen. And if it's documentation that needs to get happen, that's just part of the project. And so when I say ready for stage gate, if you look at your deliverables of a stage gate, they're often all these, did you create this document? Did you do this? Did you get approval? Did you get requirements? And at any moment, the team has already made good progress in each of those areas. Sometimes they're further along than it might be in traditional stage gate. Sometimes they might be later than what they might have done before, but they're always ready for the conversation that says, here's the intent of this project. Here are the constraints. Here's where we're working on the areas of risk. Here's what we can demonstrate the progress is. We can even estimate % completion, and we can tell you what we have left to do. And if you think about the needs of stage gate checklist and the needs of executives for a gate review, they're almost always satisfied by what the team has already worked towards in the MAHD process. Now, if they're going to use the current traditional stage gate that they already have, then they might have to do a little work on things that are kind of artificially in there. And so if they adopt MAHD, if a team adopts MAHD, you kind of have to take a fresh look at stage gate and say, what's the real intention of this gate? And are we automatically satisfying it with what we're going to accomplish through the MAHD approach or an Agile approach? And the answer is almost yes. And part of that's just educating management on what to expect in a gate review.
And one of the things I would call out is that, if you look at those IPAC iteration cycles, typically management, because especially when you start this as a new thing, they get interested. They want to see what's going on. So they'll tend to attend those initial meetings. They will see what the team is up to, actual stuff, right? Demonstrable stuff, even if it's a prototype. And what tends to happen is they start engaging more and more. So rather than a stage gate, which happens once maybe in 6 months, where they have to catch up on where they were, what the project was about, now they get to see what it is, kind of touch, feel it, see it, and literally they themselves start moving away from, I don't need a stage gate for this because I understand this project. I know what you guys are up to, where the risks are. You've addressed these big risks, and so very simple dashboards start becoming useful to them, along with the demonstrable outcomes, rather than all this dog and pony shows. But that
Yeah.
evolves. It doesn't happen overnight. It evolves after a few iterations.
Yeah, we love having debriefs after stage gates, asking executives, what was your intention of the gate? What did you really learn? Was it valuable to you? And, the results are always pretty telling that says, gates are really almost a formality. They already know if a project's moving forward or not. They're just trying to hold the team accountable. And if the team's already accountable and they're doing what they need to do, and usually much more focused in a collaborative way with better demonstrable output than a Gantt chart, they're quite happy to, let's say, remove some of the, what's a good word here, the strict nature of a gate review, because they already know. They already have what they need to allow the project to move forward, and they know that they're in the loop for tough decisions. They know they're in the loop for understanding the risk. And if you have to build the business case and build, pro forma analysis and profit and loss statements and forecasts and all that, the product manager is already part of your agile team, and they know what those needs are as well. So you've got the business and marketing in parallel with R&D working towards the same problems and evolving all the artifacts that they need to evolve that you would naturally have to do with the stage gate anyway. But it's more natural and holistic versus kind of this artificial gate with checklists. And most companies.
And in fact, one of the things, obviously we're not going into those details, but one of the things we actually talk about, or we feel works really well, is management check-ins along the way, how you do those check-ins in terms of recommendations and things like that. And that really helps teams be front and center with the management, and for management to start trusting them to say, oh, they're making good decisions. And so that takes a lot of that pressure away to try and come up with a good presentation for a stage gate.
Yeah, it takes a lot of stress from the pre-meetings to the pre-meetings of the pre-meetings to get to a stage gate review.
Okay, folks, let's
be
be respectful for the time boxing.
Yep.
We are 15 minutes over, so let's have time for the last question before we wrap it up.
You guys can probably tell we're pretty passionate about this.
Yes, you could certainly see that.
Yeah, we can talk about it all night. And honestly, I've been involved in product development longer than I can even I want to admit to. And it's just seeing something that actually works and drives results is always exciting to me.
Okay.
Any
last question.
Yeah.
Going once. Going twice.
Oh. All right.
I did have one quick clarification from before. So MAHD 4.0, Dorian mentioned, is coming next year, but I guess he didn't realize that the year's already turned.
Oh man, it's still 2024, isn't it? Oh geez, yeah. Wow. Okay, this year. I didn't promise any particular day.
Technical debt.
Yeah.
You could call it. Technical debt.
Thank you, Vishal, for pointing that out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha, for having us. Really appreciate that.
Thank you for taking time. Join us. I know you folks are in a different time zone. It's already late for you. So we have to extend our grace for you to stay late. Thank you for bringing your experience and sharing it. And thank you, folks, for asking questions and staying with us. So I'll work with Dorian and Vishal to be sure that all the resources are available to you through the shared location, and I will put the links to the MeetUp group. So give us a couple of days to sort this out, and please stay tuned for the link.
Okay.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Sasha, for organizing this.
Always. And I just had a call from Dana in background. She won't be able to join us next month. Probably it will be a different day. So we are always welcoming speakers. So if you feel like you have a topic you want to share with the group, please ping me, or if you have an idea for a group for a great speaker, I am always open. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye all.
Bye-bye.